You found the Just the Right Snowboard channel. I'm Lars Horstman, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't want to know some of the things that other people don't talk about. And today, that is certain aspects of 3D contoured base profiles. 3D base profiles are not really that new. In fact, they actually stem from the very beginnings. I've seen boards that were meant to be more like pow surfers in a way, from the late 70s and early 80s that already had like channels in it and all kinds of profiling. And the idea with that is, of course, float and powder, right? Like you can imagine that any kind of flat plank that you throw onto snow will catch around the edges much easier, much quicker than something that is dished, that is spooned. So this is kind of where this really started, but that's somewhat irrelevant for what I want to talk about here, because I'd like to pick it up about 3 decades later, around 2010, with the emerge of Bataleon's triple base technology. Let's take a look at this. So here we are, Bataleon homepage, 3D snowboarding for the people. I'm going to dive straight into the explanation of this for the people who may not know what I'm talking about. 3BT, 3 base technology, triple base technology. It used to be called TBT. It is exactly as explained in this little graphic here. When you look at portion A, the longitudinal axis of the board here, you can read on the right hand side, tip to tail positive camber delivers pop and responsiveness, creating dynamic riding characteristics. So what they're doing here is basically they're giving you a camber arc from the contact points, like from the widest spots of the boards, all the way tip to tail. But then the yellow portions here are kinked up, basically lifted up, lifted off the snow, creating, well, you could call it like a spooned kind of profile right here at the contact point. So why did Bataleon actually do this, and why did they do it at that time? Around 2007, 8, 9, everything went rocker to make snowboards more fun and more forgiving and less catchy. And when I saw my first rocker boards, I was basically in disbelief, thinking this just can't work. It's a flying saucer. It's going to be really like unstable and nervous. And yeah, that's still what I think about it. And Bataleon seemingly had the same kind of thought and figured, dang, the industry has a point trying to make things less catchy. But at the same time, let's not lose the performance aspect of true camber. So what they did is basically they kept a camber arc right down the center of the board. And so basically like, probably like, what's that, 6-7 inches wide, easily down the center. And then let me show you like this. They basically went and kinked up the sides of the board around the contact point, and then this bevel or this angle mellowed out towards the insert. And by the time you would get to the inserts, basically this was all flat again, and I strongly believe that's still the case. I haven't actually looked at a Bataleon board in a while. So this is still all like kind of flat. And then from here onwards, you get more and more beveling towards the contact points of your board. So therefore, your contact points can't catch anymore because they're not part of this preload anymore. They're just lifted out of the snow. But the center of the board still has this full camber kind of stringer. Let's call it that for now. The idea behind that, I think, is genius, and it made a lot of sense. Hey you beautiful people, on this channel you get to watch free snowboard content that I created from over 30 years of riding, 12 years of teaching snowboarding at ISIA level, and over a decade of talking to customers, people like yourselves, in a snowboard retail shop. What I'm trying to deliver with this platform, with this content, is deep dives. I'm trying to go deeper than other platforms. I'm trying to give you information that you can't find elsewhere, to truthfully find the right gear, adjust your gear the way you need it, make better turns, or tune your snowboards better. Whatever it is you get out of this, you can, if you want to, voluntarily, subscription-free, support me on a tipping platform called buymeacoffee.com. My link there is buymeacoffee.com/justaride, and every coffee helps. Thank you very much. Let's dive deeper into 3D and hopefully it helps. So reading further through this list under point B, bullet point B here, it says lifted points at the widest part of the board provide a smoother, more forgiving ride. So this is where I pointed out it's kind of spooned, right? Like I think everyone's familiar with spooned base shapes. And then C, they call that the point where it slowly blends into this flat section that I explained. Gradually increasing side base uplift ensures ultra smooth turns and superior edge hold. So they're going gradually harder on their beveling from point C towards the front section here between the contact points. And going down the line here, this is the part where I'm just going to throw in my opinion on this, and it's no more than that, and it's my own logic. Let's go through these graphics here. It's quite interesting what they have to say. Straight line, bomb straight lines with enhanced stability and control. Why would that be the case? Because again, contact points are lifted off the snow, the sides here, and they can't catch anymore. Well, luckily, Bataleon keep the portion under the feet flat, and therefore I think I want to agree with this, because the stability in these boards, you do have it right under the feet, and they don't feel overly squirrely like a banana shaped board with a pivot point between your feet would feel. So I think there's a good point to this straight lining stability. However, like if you're an experienced rider, I want to say you may still prefer true camber, because the lifted contact points here will make the board a little bit more nervous in the tips, obviously, I think. Then we have turn initiation. This is the part where I start slowly to disagree. They're saying swiftly initiate turns for a responsive and dynamic riding experience. Well, this profile here actually shows that when you change edges, you are somewhat rolling onto the new edge. And of course, this rolling is, there's time passing, right? So it is less direct, and that's obviously desired. But calling it swiftly initiate turns for a responsive and dynamic riding experience, I think dynamic is probably true, but it's clearly less responsive than contact points that are actually touching the snow. So anyhow, just another explanation of Bataleon here. And then on edge, this is also a part that I kind of disagree with. Powerful on edge performance, delivering full control for precision carving. Well, basically the side edge profile, when the board is on edge, killed part of the camber portion, right? Like if the camber, if this bevel did not exist, and the camber went straight to the contact points, then of course, as soon as you tilt the board over, literally any amount of tilt, you're already loading the full camber curve. And this is not the case here because it's already pre-bent. So yeah, basically I can't really agree with this idea of powerful on-edge performance delivering full control for precision carving. Let's take a look at a real snowboard again. So the point with this is basically there's not much difference when the board is on edge compared to a board with a nose rocker. Women's shorty, nice and small, fits on my table. You can see here the rocker portion starts about here, right? So contact point is here, rocker starts here. Let's assume Bataleon would also start their kinked or their beveled side portion right here. Then when these boards are lying on their flat base, it's the same thing, right? The edge is starting to lift off the snow right here. Now, whether the whole board curves like on a standard flat base profile with a nose rocker, or whether it's just the sides tilted up or angled or beveled, however you want to call it, that doesn't really matter anymore when that thing is on edge, right? Because in this moment, your edge tilt eventually matches this line, right? Like eventually the whole edge is in contact with the snow. And everybody who has ridden a board like this and also true camber and is somewhat into carving will confirm that basically there is a bit of a delay. And that's the same thing on an early rise standard non-3D board as it is on a triple base technology board. There is a bit of a delay. You do engage the full edge as you tilt it over more and more, where full camber, you engage the full edge instantly. And of course, again, that's a delay. But anyways, not my point, doesn't really matter. Let's keep looking at what happens when you spoon a base. I mentioned in the beginning how this spooning thing kind of started with very, very early POW surfer shapes in the late 70s. How does spooning actually contribute to float and powder versus just a standard early rise kind of base profile like on that shorty? Personally, I think when you take triple base technology, where you have a full camber section down the center, and then you just tilt the contact points up, that is not the same kind of benefit in powder as like a standard nose rocker, simply because the center strip of your snowboard is still an arc that points into the snow at the very nose. Whether you now tilt the sides or not doesn't really matter, because this arc means there's less snow that can enter the board from underneath effortlessly. So a flat base with an early rise nose design, in my opinion, still wins in regards to creating flotation. Now, what about early rise plus the spoon? I think there's nothing wrong with it. First of all, there's one thing wrong with it, and I'll get to that in a second. That's the main point of this video. If you have an early rise nose like this one here, and you then tilt the sides up as well, all you're gonna get with that is a little bit more of a surfy, kind of rolly and pivoty kind of feel, because there's really nothing at all hooking up anymore, right? Like, plus the surf rocker, the nose rocker really lifts you up. So technically, if you just want to look at that, that's a great thing. Here comes the thing that nobody talks about. And of course, that just goes back to simple physics and more cardboard. Here's just a little piece of cardboard. Envision this to be my snowboard that can flex nicely to get into turns and whatnot. Now, here's me spooning this whole thing. There you go, bit of a spoon. And now I'm trying to bend it. Well, guess what? That doesn't work anymore. You can't bend a board in this axis when it's already been bent in this axis. So what that means, and this is obviously a cardboard example, and that's an extreme because it's a flimsy material that of course stiffens up dramatically when you bend it like this. But what this demonstrates is that when you spoon a board, and it doesn't matter whether it's a gradual spoon or a kink like in Batalion's case, you do as a board designer, manufacturer, you do lose a certain amount of control over the board's flex, because there's an element that stiffens up the board that has absolutely nothing to do with anything else, as in whatever materials you use doesn't matter. This bend in the board will stiffen it up in that portion of the board. Now, what I've tried to hammer home here a billion times is that we need some sort of nose flex for multiple reasons. One thing is to initiate turns, the first thing you bend is the nose, right? The other thing, huge thing, is absorption. So none of this, of course, applies regarding absorption when you think of a board that is only ever going to be ridden in perfectly pristine cat skiing powder, all untracked. Then all these designs are perfect. Actually, you would possibly benefit from something that doesn't even flex. Think of a surfboard on the ocean, in the water. Surfboards don't really flex. Yes, there is a flex, but it's so minimal, it's noticeable too, but you're not turning a surfboard because it bends, right? So basically the planing of a surfboard has a lot to do with its rigidity and then of course with its bottom contour, the rocker. So the same goes technically for riding a snowboard in pristine perfect powder. Now we are not riding pristine perfect powder, most of us don't. It's always choppy and bumpy after an hour and a half at the very latest at the resort. And then what do? You need some sort of absorption. That absorption ideally comes from the nose, because that is the first portion of the board that hits an obstacle. If your nose was fully rigid and it would just it would hit something like avalanche debris that got buried with the last snow dump or whatever, it would just buck you like crazy, right? Like the nose would not give and everything of this impact would be sent into your feet. So we need some sort of nose flex. Now, if the spooning or kinking or whatever you want to call it kills control over the flex, and you still want absorption and damping in that nose, what can you do? Well, you make it thinner, for example, to eventually give it some flex again. There is a point, and my little cardboard example shows that it can't be thinner than cardboard, and it just doesn't want to bend, right? So there is a point where making it thinner and thinner obviously goes at the cost of fragility, right? Like, or the cost of durability, if you will. You're creating something that is highly fragile. So what are you going to do? Of course, you can't just create a board that breaks instantly when it hits a little bump in the snow. So you got to maintain the stability of the nose, but create the flex by putting it elsewhere. And you don't have that much room to put it elsewhere. And the most logical way would be to put it into the center. And that is actually a thing that is currently happening, or has been happening for the last few years quite a bit, that manufacturers make boards that are actually visibly thinner between the feet than under the feet, or partially than in the tips. And yeah, like it's good because it addresses the fact that we need flex, right? Like we need flex to pop an ollie, we need flex to bend our board because we bend the boards into a turn shape when we're riding hard snow. So making the center softer, if we killed that kind of flex in the tip with our 3D profiling, is a good idea. However, there's one downside. You can't just make the center thinner and softer without making it torsionally softer. And torsionally soft versus torsionally stiff, I've talked about this here on many occasions. There is no good or bad about this. It's basically who rides the board and what are they doing on that board. Any kind of beginner or slower speed, slope style, you know, like buttery kind of, butter tricks kind of guy will benefit from a board that is torsionally softer, because it's a lot of foot steering, and that's a good thing to basically have the softness between the feet, because it gives you a lot of control to tweak the board into whichever shape you need it to perform your tricks, or to just get it to turn as a beginner at really slow speeds. Now, as soon as we get into higher level riding, more advanced riding, where you're carving your turns more rather than sliding around, that torsional softness will cause the board to basically, it tends to wobble quicker when it's on edge. And also, if your riding isn't totally on point, what can happen, like chatter, heel edge chatter is quite often a product of the tip of the board following a different arc or a different curve than the tail of the board. And this is due to different amounts of angulation under the two different feet. And this comes from your body position not being accurate enough. And of course, a board that is torsionally quite soft, it won't resist your inaccuracies and basically, you know, put a turn shape down that isn't really a nice arc anymore, because yeah, your feet are hitting the snow at a different angle. So again, there's no good or bad to this. It all depends on what you like. My main point with this is I'm trying to, you know, I'm always trying to take a bit of a look behind marketing hype, because I just don't trust it. And there's hardly anything, any design aspect of a snowboard where you can throw that into the board and it makes everything better. It's solely positive. There's hardly any such thing. You could say, well, but I mean, like a really high-end bass, that'd be great, wouldn't it? For everybody. Well, no, it wouldn't, because a high-end bass requires a lot of maintenance. What if you're just not waxing your board? You just don't do that. Then actually that bass is a disadvantage for you. So there is no such thing as this is the holy grail and that's how it all has to be. The spooning thing is actually also interesting to observe. Like when you think of, for example, Gentemstick. Gentemstick are supposed to be like the holy mother of power boards, right? Japanese powder boards, beautiful designs, no spooning. What's going on there? They're riding the deepest snow in the world on the most beautiful, most functional power shapes, no spooning. Why? Why is there no spooning? Because they can't do it? I don't think so. The Japanese built Toyotas. They surely can put some spoon on a board. Anyways, just food for thought here. Interesting development in the whole spooning thing is also that I see it go back a little. There's a lot of companies that put the spoon into an area. Let me grab the other board here again. They put the spoon into an area where it doesn't affect much at all, other than when you're buttering. So basically, contact point is right here. That's where your effective edge starts. And spooning would only affect your turning when it's within this section, right? Like this doesn't really touch the snow in a turn, so whatever. And some companies have gone to spoon designs where it's only beveled up around the whole front section of the board. And yeah, of course, in powder that would deal with terrain a little bit easier, make it more forgiving because everything is kinked up and it can't hook up. And then obviously when you do like tail presses or nose presses, again, very beneficial design. But the fact that some companies are moving back from how extreme they've applied the spoon previously, that tells me a story. So as I said before, there's hardly anything that is just good or just bad. And I'm here to, for the most part, educate rather than to judge. So the big question is, of course, who is it for? What's the deal with spooning? I personally believe, and again, that is an opinion, that spooning has a great place, as many other snowboard design inventions of the last 20 years, in freestyle applications. Because think about it, for freestyle you need good pop, right? You need responsiveness, but you don't want this hookiness, not necessarily. Some people love it, they actually utilize it to get more responsive, spins and whatnot, by having the full edge engaged. Like lots of pros are riding true full camber, contact point to contact point, pretty much. So at a very advanced level, you're actually utilizing that amount of camber. But otherwise, you want the pop, you want responsiveness, but you don't want the hooky, catchy feel. So any kind of, like TBT, back to Bataleon, beginning of this episode, they really did something genius there, because they give you that. They give you both, right? You have that full camber arc, under tension, but then lifted contact points. I want to say for freestyle, that's actually a smarter design than, no beveled contact points and simply early rise. Because with early rise, you lose a certain amount of camber. So therefore, you lose a certain amount of that responsive pop. So I think, really, it's really good for that kind of stuff. But when you consider that any kind of spooning messes with the flex, and when you believe, like I personally think that the definition of edge grip, and that is a very big part of my riding, I need my boards to be controllable and grippy on edge, because I don't like washing my turns. When you believe that the definition of edge grip is a board that can distribute the pressure onto the edge evenly at any given portion of the board's angulation throughout the turn, then of course throwing sections into the board that ramp up weirdly because I put a kink in it in the other direction, that's not going to create that for me, right? Like, and then I have to create a center that is actually a little bit softer than the tips, or right, like I have to manipulate this gradual nice flex that would otherwise perform with me, because I also gradually increase angulation and push and then release, right? It's all gradual, it's all a flow, part of a flow. And this flex that I want to be kind of like evenly distributed is part of this flow. So for me, that just doesn't really work. But again, like there's a lot of people that benefit from this. However, I hope that this reflection on 3D designs makes sense to you, and that it basically further educates you into the direction of finally and certainly picking the right snowboard for your needs. Please let me know in the comments whether this helped you to get there, and otherwise I will hopefully see you on the hills soon. Take care everyone, bye bye.